have a honey-baked ham, some spicy Chinese takeout, some Indian curry, and diver scallops, and a challenge for you. Pick one wine that's going to pair beautifully with all of these 4 dishes. What are you going to choose? What could go with something as spicy as Szechuan pork, or curry, or a meat like ham, and something so delicate as seafood? There's only one wine that can do all of this, a German Riesling. Germany is home to some of the most versatile food pairing wines in the world. This makes German Riesling the little darling of sommeliers everywhere, or at least it should be. Germany is the original benchmark for Riesling, and to understand it, you need to understand it here first. It's at one end of the spectrum for Riesling, but also one end of the spectrum for white wine in general. Then we can take a look at Riesling in Austria, which is an entirely different style of Riesling and yet another old world classic. From Germany, you're going to need a Liebfraumilch, a Riesling such as Kabinett, Spätlese, or Auslese, a German red, like a Spätburgunder, which is Pinot Noir, or a Dornfelder, if you can find it. And then we go to Austria. You'll need a Riesling, you'll need a Gruner Veltliner, and a Zweigelt, again, if you can find it, which is a red grape variety. Most of what Germany produces is white wine. Why do you think that is? Well, most red grapes generally don't ripen well in cool climates, and Germany pushes the boundaries of growing grapes at northern latitudes. It's about 50 degrees north latitude, which is the same as Newfoundland in Canada. No beach bunny grapes here. German wine regions have a continental climate, which means extremes, warm summers with very, very cold winters. This is an area where frost is a huge issue, as well as summer hailstorms. The climate has led to a classification system influenced by harvest. Now, remember how the classification system for quality wine in Bordeaux is based on producers, and in Burgundy it's based on the classification of vineyards? Because Germany is so far up north, it's difficult to ripen grapes fully. Therefore, Germany's classification system is based on ripeness levels, or I should say sugar levels, attained at harvest. They do have table wines called Deutsche Tafelwein, which is the equivalent of vin de table in France and vino da tavola in Italy. Then there's Landwein, which is the equivalent of France's vin de pays. Neither of these represent more than 10% of the total production of German wines, though. The 2 major categories of wine quality, or Qualitätswein, in Germany are Qualitätswein bestimmte Anbaugebiet, or QBA for short, and Qualitätswein mit Prädikat, or QMP for short, which is even higher quality. Do you know a brand called Blue Nun? It was incredibly popular in the 1980s, and back then it was a type of German wine called Liebfraumilch, which is of QBA status. The name Liebfraumilch comes from the German for beloved mother's milk, and it originally came from the vineyards of the Church of Our Lady in the city of Worms in the 18th century. While it does have Riesling in it, the predominant white grape is Müller-Thurgau. This grape was created by Dr. Hermann Müller from the area of Thurgau. Why? Well, Dr. Müller wanted the quality of Riesling as well as its resistance to cold weather, but he also wanted a grape that ripened earlier and would have higher yields than Riesling. In other words, he was trying to make Riesling more efficient. If you have a Liebfraumilch, let's taste it side by side with the German Riesling. First, we're going to take a look at the color. Liebfraumilch is generally pale straw, and you're going to see some green hues, but sometimes it's not as pale as Riesling. Let's do the chest, chin, nose test. It's somewhat aromatic because it does have some Riesling in it, but it's nowhere near the level of Riesling all on its own. And what you get here is some citrus notes as well as some stone fruit. I'm also getting some sulfur dioxide, which is kind of common in some German wines. It's going to be a pungent smell. But let's taste it. It's sweet, and it's lighter bodied, but it doesn't have the acidity level of Riesling. Now, if you taste it in comparison with the Riesling, you're going to notice that the Liebfraumilch is a bit lower, and you feel that on the sides of your tongue, remember. And it doesn't actually have as much depth as, say, German Riesling. It doesn't have, like, let's say, the depth here of the Spätlese. But don't knock it, though. It's a great crowd-pleasing wine, and especially for the entry-level wine drinker who likes a little bit of sweetness. Since my family finds a lot of my favorite wines sour, I'll give them a Liebfraumilch, and they love it. And I get to save all the Grand Cru Burgundy for me. Everybody's happy. For quality levels of QBA, like Liebfraumilch and lower, the producers are allowed to add sugar prior to fermentation. What does this do? Do you think this sweetens the wine? No. You only add more sugar before fermentation to beef up the wine, to yield more alcohol. This process is called chaptalization, and it was introduced because the grapes at the lower quality levels could not get ripe enough, so they needed a little extra push. Chaptalization is illegal for QMP levels, but winemakers are allowed to add Süßreserve, which means sweet reserve in German. It's unfermented juice used as a sweetening agent after fermentation, and it can be used for all but the highest quality wines. For those wines, producers prefer to stop the fermentation prior to completion so that there's a little bit of residual sugar left over instead of adding something to it to make it sweet. There are 6 styles of QMP based on their level of sugar concentration. The lightest concentration of sugar within the QMP category is Cabinet. These wines are light in body, crisp, and more focused on their fruit flavors. Then there's Spätlese, which means late harvest. These wines have a higher sugar level than the Cabinet, but remember in Lecture 9 we revealed that legend of how Spätlese came to be. If you have a Spätlese, let's taste it. Here I have a Spätlese from the Mosel region. It's pale straw color, and it has a slight green tint to it. Let's smell it. You can smell it there already. Very perfumed. Riesling is a very, very aromatic grape variety. And in the Mosel, and especially cooler climates, we're getting a lot of lime character. A lot of citrus, a lot of lime. But we're also getting a hint of something like an exotic fruit, like pineapple. Now let's taste it. This is sweeter than the Liebfraumilch. However, because it has such a high level of acidity, it cleanses the palate. And here we have a wine that's probably about 7.5% alcohol. So it's fairly low in comparison to other wines we've tasted around the world. But notice, even as I'm talking, the length of it. Because of that sugar and the high acid, it does this little dance between the two, lengthening the length of it. So that's a quality wine there. And again, it finishes clean. You don't need water to refresh your palate to go on to the next one. And this one definitely has more depth than the Liebfraumilch. And what I mean by depth, I mean more stuff's going on in your mouth. Yeah, it's richer, and the flavor lasts longer. There's more stuff going on. The ripeness level above Spätlese is Auslese, and this refers to individually selected extra ripe bunches of grapes, which we mentioned in Lecture 9. The name, as I explained previously, means selected from the harvest. While Spätlese grapes are generally not infected with the noble rot botrytis, which concentrates the sugars even more, Auslese sometimes does include botrytis-infected grapes. Because these specific clusters are more carefully selected and picked, the price for Auslese is normally higher than Spätlese. Now, when studying for the MW exam, we were expected to identify whether the grapes were infected with botrytis. Remember in Lecture 7 when we spoke of autolytic notes? Well, for botrytis, we say the wine has botrytic notes. Botrytis on the nose is like a honeyed aroma, and some say it tastes like dried apricots or marzipan. On the palate, the wines that have grapes infected with botrytis are weightier and fuller bodied. This is because of the glycerol that botrytis produces. Hey, you want to impress a sommelier or a guest at your next party? Tell them your Auslese has strong botrytic notes, especially if it does. You'll definitely earn their respect. These grapes have a higher sugar concentration than Spätlese, so their wines are generally fuller in body, higher in alcohol, and sweeter. There is a trend with some producers of Spätlese and Auslese to ferment them completely dry instead of stopping the fermentation to leave residual sugar. These wines are called trocken, which means dry in German. So if on the label you see Spätlese or Auslese and you also see the word trocken, know that the wine is going to be bone dry. Sometimes you don't see trocken on the label. And if you're looking for something a bit drier, look at the alcohol level. It's a good indication. It's by law they have to have the alcohol level on every label. And if you have a Spätlese that's about 13% level of alcohol, chances are it's trocken. There's also a term called halbtrocken, which means half dry. But you may also see the terms medium dry or off dry. But these are not dry. It has a little bit of sweetness to them. After Auslese, the sugar level in the grapes increases to Birnauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese, and ice wine levels, which we already covered in our dessert wine lecture, Lecture 9. Now, when I first started studying, I took my first course in New York with Kevin Zraly, who was the wine manager at the Windows on the World at the top of the Twin Towers. And I had my classes at the top of the Twin Towers. Now, I remembered his German wine class very well because he came in and he said, all right, has everybody memorized the Grand Crus, the 7 Grand Crus of Chablis, the 32 Grand Crus of the Côte d'Or, the 57 appellations of Bordeaux? Well, great. Now you can start on the 1,400 villages and the 2,600 vineyards of Germany. This explains why it's so hard to read labels. And there are a few Americans who are brave enough to try doing this. But don't worry, we're going to help decode this later on. The German wine regions are located in southwest Germany and date back to the Romans. As in Burgundy, the quality of the vineyards and wines can be attributed to monks and monasteries, especially through the Middle Ages. For example, Kloster Eberbach, a monastery in the Rheingau, was founded in 1135. And they made wine and carefully monitored its quality. They were Cistercian monks who made a pilgrimage every year to their mother monastery in Burgundy. So no doubt, many influences came into play that improved the wine. Wine was their most important business. And today, Kloster Eberbach is one of the oldest surviving Gothic buildings in Germany and the center of the German Wine Academy. The German wine regions are primarily around the Rhine River, and there are 13 quality regions. We'll just highlight the ones that are exported to the United States most often. One of the most well-known regions is the Mosel-Saar-Ruhr. Mosel is the main tributary that comes off the Rhine River around the city of Koblenz, and the Saar River and the Ruhr River are tributaries of the Mosel River. However, starting with the 2007 vintage, regardless of whether the grapes come from the Mosel, the Saar, or Ruhr River valleys, producers have been officially allowed to shorten the name of Mosel-Saar-Ruhr to just Mosel. This explains why you see Mosel-Saar-Ruhr on bottles before 2007 and only see Mosel after 2007. The vineyards cover the banks of the Mosel River and are planted on very steep slopes. Many of the grapes are planted on slopes about 60 degrees. Because of the steepness of the slopes, mechanical harvesting is absolutely impossible. Can you imagine being one of those harvesters? You definitely build up your leg muscles there. The rivers in this region moderate the climate, raising the temperature and helping the grapes ripen. The ripening is also helped by the reflection of the sun's rays off the water. The best wines come from these slaty soils. Now here I have a piece of slate from my trip to the German wine regions. Because it's hard, gray, and flat, it warms up very quickly and retains heat very well. This does wonders for the Riesling in the cool regions. The Rieslings from the Mosel are the most delicate of any of the regions. They're also the most crisp and generally the lowest in alcohol. If you looked at the bottle of Mosel Spätlese and then looked at a bottle of Rheingau Spätlese, chances are the alcohol level would be lower for the Mosel. But don't limit yourself to just the wines from the Mosel. People often overlook the Mittelrhein region, which has similar growing conditions, steep slopes, and lots of slate as well. And these can be great deals for you. The piece of slate that I have here is from the Mittelrhein, from a producer called Lanius Knab. Now, while I was there, I asked him, how do they stop erosion? And what they do is they plant natural grasses along in the middle of the vineyard rows to prevent that erosion. Now, while I was visiting Ratzenberger, I saw a unique type of grass there, and I asked his young daughter to point it out. And we picked out just a simple leaf, and here it is. It's called Citron Melisse, and it actually has a very lemony kind of character to it. And I actually asked myself, does it add any lemony character to the wine? Well, I mean, there's no scientific proof, but it is fun to think about. And when traveling to wine regions, it's always a good idea to bring a small book like this with you, so you can keep a diary of your journey and make tasting notes. So you can see here, I've put little asterisks next to the ones I thought were particularly yummy. Now, I used to travel around with a lot of large notebooks, but it's great to travel around with these little books because they can fit anywhere, and they're very light. You can fit them in your pocketbook, in your pocket, anywhere. And I've even asked the wineries themselves to give me some labels so that I can put them in the book as well. And you know what? It's really fun to go back to them later on, and it can remind you of what you liked if you bring it to the wine store. Now, to the east, the region of Rheingau is a bit warmer, as the Taunus Mountains hold back the cold north winds. And many of the vineyards are on south-facing slopes. Remember from Lecture 3, the south and west exposures yield much more warmth and keep it warm longer than the north and the east? Well, the fruit here takes on a different character because of that. More stone fruit, like peaches and nectarines and apricots. And they're a little fuller in body, not quite as delicate as in the Mosel. The Rheinhessen is the largest vine-growing region in Germany, and it encompasses the city of Worms, where Liebfraumilch was originated. Although many of the wines produced here are generic, entry-level wines, and they have a lower percentage of Riesling here, there are some great wines from specific vineyards that have red sandy soils and that face the Rhine. These can get very complex with some exotic fruit aromas. But what about red wines? For this, we go to the warmest and most southerly area for German vineyards, the region of Baden. Or you can go to the Pfalz, which is the sunniest and driest region in Germany. Unlike the other regions we've mentioned, the land in these two regions is relatively flat or just gently sloping. The soil here is more fertile and has heat-retaining gravel that helps ripen the grapes. They do have Pinot Noir here, but it's called Spätburgunder. So if you still have a bottle of red Burgundy, you may want to taste it in comparison side by side. The color of Spätburgunder is going to be a little bit paler than Burgundy. This is a clue that it comes from a little bit of a cooler climate than Burgundy. But the aromas are very, very similar. In fact, Pinot Noir is just as aromatic because Pinot Noir is an aromatic grape variety. And then you get some oak tones as well, some vanilla, some spice, and toast. And on the palate, it's delicate and light-bodied and has a higher level of acidity, even more so than Burgundy. Now, all of these are typical for Spätlese, again, giving us a clue for the cooler climate. But they can be really very pretty, but they can also be rich and extracted as well. Some of them are even very, very long-lived. When I was in Germany, I was at Kloster Eberbach, and they had me taste a 1959 Spätburgunder. And it was in their 15th century cellars, and it's the oldest one that they have in their cellars is from 1882. Now, German Spätburgunder, if you see it on a wine list or a store, is generally less expensive than the classic Pinot Noirs from Burgundy. This can be a great find for you, especially if you are a Pinot Noir lover and you really like the minerality of the Old World. Now, another red grape variety you see is Dornfelder. It can have a deeper color, definitely deeper color than Spätburgunder, and it's generally consumed young for its red and blue fruit, like cherry and boysenberry, and I actually think it smells a lot like blueberry. It's an unpretentious wine, though, and it can be quite good for casual meals and a very good value for you. Okay, now let's tackle how to read a German wine label. Here we have a label from Prüm. If you see the term Weingut, it means wine estate. Here you see that it's a Riesling from the producer Weingut, Johann Joseph Prüm. You may also see a term Gutsabfüllung or Zeugeabfüllung, both meaning wine is estate bottled. The quality level is QMP. See where it says Qualitätswein mit Prädikat? This tells us it's a quality wine. Notice too that the level of sweetness is Spätlese. Now, anything with an ER at the end of it means belongs to. So sometimes you see the vintage with an ER at the end. This says 2009 ER. It means that wine came from the 2009 vintage. We see that it comes from the Mosel region. Here we see Velena Sonnenau. What's that mean? Well, remember, anything with ER at the end of it means belongs to. And usually the word after the ER suffix word is the vineyard. So on this bottle, it says Velena Sonnenau. This means that the vineyard of Sonnenau is within the village of Velena. Now on to Austria. Let's start with their worst scandal. In the 1980s, a few Austrian winemakers added an illegal chemical to their wine called diethylene glycol to add body and make the sweet wines taste even sweeter. This chemical has another name. You may know it. Antifreeze. Even though the amount of this chemical was totally harmless, once the press got a hold of this news, that was it. Austria wine's industry absolutely collapsed. But there was a silver lining. Shortly after the scandal, Austria's industry created a new set of stricter quality laws, and the quality of Austrian wines we see today is absolutely fantastic. No wine region has succeeded in turning around its reputation the way the Austrians have. As far as labeling in wine terms, many of them are very similar to Germany, so at least that's good news. I don't know if you could handle much more in this lecture of German pronunciation. However, the styles of wine are quite different. Here we have an Austrian Riesling. You may want to compare it to your German Riesling. Got to make sure that it's the same vintage though. Here we have a 2005, which is a very, very ripe vintage, and you're going to definitely notice the color. Because here it's about goldish color. Again, it's very aromatic. But you get the same kinds of Riesling benchmark notes. The citrus, the lime, the minerality. I mean, that comes to the old world, but that strong minerality that's there. But you also get, even like some of the Rheingau, you get some of that stone fruit. Now let's taste it. Now, unlike the German Riesling and the Spätlese, this one is absolutely bone dry. And this is the biggest difference between Austria and German Rieslings. You also notice that warmth in your back palate? You generally get a higher level of alcohol with Austrian Rieslings. So look on the label for the alcohol, you'll notice that it's much higher. And it's higher because it's absolutely dry. It's trocken. Austria's climate is a bit warmer and drier than Germany's. However, around the lake called Neusiedlersee, it's moister because of the cool morning mists, and the afternoons are sunny and dry. If you remember from Lecture 9, this means that it's perfect conditions for noble rot, and that means that some incredible sweet wines come from this area. The Austria Riesling is an old world classic, but Austria's popularity in the last decade has really come from another great variety that's very specific to Austria, Gruner Veltliner. If you have one, let's taste it. But to really appreciate its uniqueness, you may want to taste it versus the Austrian Riesling. You notice the color. The color is fairly similar to each other, so not too big of a difference there. And it's aromatic, but it's not as aromatic as the Riesling. But what you get here, you get some lemony notes. But there's two benchmarks for Gruner Veltliner. One is lentils, and I gotta admit, I don't taste or smell lentils when I taste Gruner, but some people get a very strong lentil aroma when they smell these wines. But I get some strong white pepper. Now, if you don't know what white pepper tastes like, don't worry about it. It just recognizes, your palate recognizes it as a spice. So let's taste it. These are medium-bodied wines. And you have, this one is fairly medium in acidity, but that might be comparison to the Austrian Riesling I just had. But they can be quite crisp. And their alcohol is fairly moderate as well. It's not surprising that this is a crowd pleaser, being medium body, medium acidity, medium alcohol. And in its youth, it could be appreciated for all this youthful, fruity character, but they can age. And when they do, they take on some honey and toast characteristics. Wachau, Kremstal, and Kamptal are the three main regions in Lower Austria, or Niederösterreich. Each region has its own unique terroir. I generally find the Wachau the most elegant in terms of its structure, followed by Kremstal, which has a richness all of its own, and then Kamptal, which is the most concentrated. Wachau's wines have the highest quality level and the richest concentration of fruit, the best balance and complexity, and a slight honeyed character. One of their several unique wines is called Schmaragd Grüner Veltliner. It's named after the green lizard called a schmaragd that basks in the sun on the Wachau's hot, steep stone terraces above the Danube River. Schmaragd Grüners are quite enchanting. Then there is Federspiel, which has a lower level of alcohol and an extract level. These wines are not as ripe as Schmaragd. The name comes from falconry, once a very popular pastime in the Wachau, and the falcon's symbol exemplifies the racy elegance of these dry white wines. The third, I should mention, is Steinfeder. It's lighter, lower in alcohol, and slightly spritzy, meaning it's got some carbon dioxide in it. The warmest and driest region in Austria is Burgenland, which is where you see red varieties planted. Zweigelt is the name of the most popular red there. It's a cross between two other grape varieties, Blaufränkisch and Saint Laurent. Zweigelt has a rich cherry fruit, and this wine, just like Grüner Veltliner, also has a hint of pepper. If you have one, you'll notice that it has soft tannins as well. Some examples can get really concentrated and are age-worthy, though. Next up, we journey back to sunshine and warmth. We go to Spain and Portugal, the last two countries we focus on in the Old World. You'll need the following wines: a Rías Baixas, a Rueda or Rioja, a Rioja, either a Crianza, a Reserva or Gran Reserva, a Priorat, a Humilla or Yecla Monastral, and a red wine from Portugal, such as the Douro, the Bairrada, or Alentejo. The next lecture is a logical end to the Old World, as these wines bridge the gap between the Old World's traditional style and the New World's international modern style. And until then, I will say Auf Wiedersehen and cheers.